good that, I mean, they didn't make no security people, now they're paying for it. That'd be good. I have no idea what's happening here, but let's start again. Good. I'm glad to see some of you are still looking enthusiastic. A couple of seminars this last week. I think there were some people who were looking seriously dejected. I hope it's got nothing to do with the classes, and it's something to do with water dripping from your ceiling in your hall or something. Because there was a lot of enthusiasm when we started. I think some seminar groups it's beginning to kind of tail off. Try and pick up, guys, because you've got to keep your enthusiasm for this, because it does involve a lot of work. I think those of you who did the last fact pattern seminar know that, right? You can't pick up the piece of paper containing the seminar fact pattern, read it on the way on the tube and hope to do the answers. It can't be done, right? You guys discovered that. So try and get into it, because it's the only way you're going to understand this module. Okay, spend some time on the fact patterns and work from it. That is your learning base, not my lectures, okay? Because seriously, that's what will make you really understand what it is that you're doing. And in particular, I always said, you learn the technology that we're trying to achieve in these classes at the seminars, not at the lectures. So spend a lot of time on those seminars, okay, rather than reading more and more books. I think I made this point over the past week that many of the fact patterns actually involved just 3 or 4 rules. That's it. The rest was fact pattern analysis. So try and focus, okay? I think it's important, because I'd like to keep the enthusiasm going. What I don't want to see is by Christmas everybody looking like, oh, God, I'm going to commit suicide. Okay, don't. I need you guys looking enthusiastic, because we are slowly going to get into more complex stuff. Yeah, I know. How many of you are doing Finance 3? Okay, quite a bit. And that's going to be even more complex, okay? So, but unfortunately, if you want big money, well, you've got to do things that other people can't do, right? And that's more and more complex, more and more money. It's as simple as that. So have a go, but work on those seminar questions. That will make you really appreciate the stuff that I'm doing at lectures. The lectures are easy to understand, aren't they? No? Come on, guys. Couple of admin things which I forgot to mention. One is your next reading list is on Keats, on bonds and beyond, okay? It covers international bonds, MTNs, and US regulation of capital markets, EU regulation of capital markets, and UK regulation of capital markets, okay? So that's the next big chunk that we're going to do. The reading list is up there, and like I said, don't spend a lot of time reading. Okay, I'm not giving you a reading list because I've got to give you one. And another thing, please, try and access the actual original material. Like I said about Rome 1 and Rome 2, press the button, look at Rome 1, read it, be familiar with it. And there's a lot more coming up when we do bonds. You've got US regulation, again, you can press a button and look at it. You've got EU prospectus regulation, press a button and you can look at it, okay? Just much better that you read it firsthand. All right, have a go at doing that. The other admin thing is I put the next fact pattern seminar on Keats. Have you guys seen it? Okay, fantastic. Done. So you're working on it, I hope. Finally, the practice project module, people who are on it, there's a list which has appeared, at least it's, I know, it's on Keats, under practice project, obviously. So please check that if you want to find out whether you're there or not or whatever, okay? And if you have a problem, just come by and ask, okay? Done. So let's move on to the final section on syndicated loans, which is to do with, hang on, where the heck is this thing? We're going to look today at I said I'm going to talk you through the role of the lead manager. Where am I on this? Hang on. 76? As in slide number? My goodness, that's really good. Means you really are concentrating. That's great. Good. That's what we're going to look at. So, let's try and understand what the lead manager does. I think we went through the lead manager in the syndications process, where it puts together the whole syndication info memoranda, the documentation, what it does, and all of that. Now we're going to look at, just home in and focus and itemize exactly what those functions are, what the law is in this area, and how do we deal with any potential problems for the lead manager. Okay, let's just work that through. Now, first thing to remember is once the syndicated loan agreement is signed, the lead manager becomes legally the agent bank for the syndicate. That's the first thing that you need to know. It's the agent bank for the syndicate. It is also called the lead manager, it doesn't matter, but legally it's the agent bank for the syndicate. Let's try and then home in on, say, and ask ourselves, what is it that this agent bank does? First of all, you remember something you already know. Its job is to certify to the syndicate that the conditions precedent have been satisfied before funds are disbursed. That's the first function. Second, again, you excuse me, you come across this function. It acts as the paying agent for transmission of funds from the syndicate to the borrower and from the borrower to the syndicate. Okay? Second function. You come across that as well, but let's look at that in detail. Thirdly, it has the obligation to notify events of default to the syndicate, and, if needs be, to act on the occurrence of an event of default by calling a vote of the syndicate to decide whether to call default or no. Now, there's a question mark on one of the bullet points. During the life of the syndicate, during the life of the syndicated loan, there's a question mark. What are this agent bank's obligations, if any, with regard to whether or not the borrower is complying with its obligations under the syndicated loan's covenants, terms, and duties? That we're going to have to look at in some detail, because the straight answer, one-line answer that I can give you now, which I'm going to have to elaborate in detail, is there are no obligations to monitor compliance by the borrower of its obligations under the SLA. But let's look at that in some detail. But this is just the itemization of the obligations. So, starting with certification of compliance with conditions precedent. That, I think, we've looked at. The agent bank's obligation is to certify that all conditions precedent have been satisfied by the borrower prior to transmission of funds. That's easy, straightforward. But how does it decide this? Does it do its own thing? Well, it can't, because, for example, the borrower has got to submit constitutional documents, which may or may not be in readable language for the agent bank. It needs to look at whether exchange control permission has been granted, if that's applicable. It's got to look at whether or not the transaction is within the powers of the borrower, and so on. All these things that the agent bank must decide on and then certify to the syndicate banks. How does it do it? Well, the only way forward, as usual, is by relying on legal opinions from lawyers in the borrower's country with regard to powers, status, capacity, whether exchange control permission has been obtained, and the like. Now, the important point that the clause makes is that insofar as the agent bank relies on the opinions of lawyers and other experts required to provide the information to the agent bank, and it has chosen those experts and lawyers reasonably, there is no liability owed to the syndicate if it transpires, for example, that exchange control permissions have not actually been obtained, as long as the agent bank has acted on the advice of lawyers, reliable lawyers in the country of incorporation of the borrower. Yeah. As in legal opinion. Yeah, why? You mean no telephone calls? Because, I mean, would you advise agent banks saying, yeah, phone call from somewhere in Mexico, that's fine, no deal. You need that hard opinion in black and white because you're relying on it. Sorry? It's a legal opinion, not a piece of advice. It's a formal legal opinion. Okay, so exclusion of liability is what the ASLA does insofar as the agent bank has acted on the advice of lawyers and other experts whom they require in order to give the certificate saying conditions precedent satisfied. Obligation number 2, it must act as paying agent for funds transfers. This is first of all funds transferred by the syndicate to the borrower and then funds transferred by the borrower to the syndicate, meaning all interest and principal which the borrower has got to pay the syndicate will be transferred to the syndicate via the agent bank. Usually the payments will be made to a designated account of the agent bank by the borrower for the syndicate, and then the funds will be transferred out of that account into the account of the syndicate banks. Now, this has a dual function. If you go back to that diagram which we looked at, because the funds are being channeled through the agent bank, and there's no other way of the borrower making the interest and principal payments, it means that the funds are collected in one place with the advantage that the agent bank can ensure that everybody is complying with the pro rata sharing clause. You remember the pro rata sharing clause? Well, that clause is operated by the agent bank through this syndicate account of the agent bank. So the pro rata sharing clause, in a way, is given effect to by the agent bank because of this agent bank account into which the borrower will pay all its interest and principal. Right, let's go back. Hang on. Oops. Okay. Now, in this structure, there's one thing that I think we've already talked about, but let's pin it down. The agent bank on day one and in a revolving syndicated loan ongoing will make transfers. Will make transfers from the syndicate to the borrower. Now, like everything else, as lawyers, you create for every possible eventualities. Oops, sorry. First eventuality that you need to deal with by a specific clause is to deal with a reality of the marketplace. Funds are transferred to the agent bank by the syndicate to be transferred to the borrower. The funds, as you might have worked out, have to be transferred to the borrower by a specified time on a specified date after conditions precedent are satisfied. Now, the agent bank must receive funds from the syndicate to make that transfer. That's the legal position. It's not transferring its own funds, remember, it's transferring the funds of the banks which have agreed to lend. The logistical problem is that the agent bank, at the point of time of transfer of funds specified in the SLA, should have received all of the funds from the syndicate, but it does not know whether it has or hasn't, because it's same-day transfer of funds. So there are situations in which the agent bank may have transferred funds in dollars or yen or whatever the currency is to the borrower without knowing that it has received funds from the syndicate. And it may, at the end of the day on which the transfers are to have been made, realize that some of the banks, or one of the banks, or two of the banks have failed to lend, failed to transfer the funds as required under the SLA into the agent bank's account. Now, instead of getting into some huge cross-jurisdictional litigation about unjust enrichment, mistaken transfers, yadi-blah-di-da, what you do have is a very practical solution. There's a clause in the SLA which provides that if the agent bank has transferred funds to the borrower on drawdown date for funds, for loans, and the agent bank does not receive all of the funds from any one or more of the syndicate banks, that amount of funds can be demanded back from the borrower immediately by the agent bank. And the borrower has no option but to return those funds. That's called the clawback clause, clawing it back. Now, the clawback clause is justified on one simple premise which you're quite familiar with. The loans are those of individual banks, not of the lead manager or the agent bank. Therefore, if those banks or one bank or two banks in the syndicate fails to lend, there is no obligation to make up the difference. Therefore, the agent bank is given the right under the clawback clause to ask the borrower to repay back to the agent bank funds which should have been given to the agent bank by a syndicate bank or banks, and therefore the right to recover under the clawback clause. Yeah? Clear? Yeah? Oh, okay. Your question is, what is the time frame for the clawback? Well, the answer is immediately. On notification, borrower must return the funds. On certification by the agent bank that it has not received XYZ $1 million or million yen or million whatever. It's ASAP, immediately. Next comes the problem going the other way. Syndicate transfers loans to the agent bank for purposes of transfer to the borrower, and in the extremely unlikely scenario that the agent bank goes into insolvency at that very point. It hasn't happened before as far in my practice, in the years that I practiced, because agent banks, lead managers are generally the Deutsches, the Citicorps, the Nomuras, massive global banks. One of them collapses, it's not like Lehman Brothers, this is a major catastrophe. So it hasn't happened, but as lawyers providing coverage in a syndicated loan agreement, you deal with that potential, how extremely unlikely issue that we're talking about. And the way it's handled is that the syndicate banks are required to make the payments of syndicated loan funds to a specific segregated account of the agent bank, designated and nominated as syndicate funds. What's the purpose of that? Well, because that structure will be looked at by the insolvency administration or a court in the country where the agent bank is incorporated. The insolvency law of the agent bank will then have to look at whether or not these funds transferred by the syndicate into this segregated account fall into the general insolvency of the agent bank, or whether it is segregated, kept separate for the benefit of the borrower. Now, I don't think I can give you an answer, because it will depend on whether it's Japanese law, German law, French law, whatever the law system that applies. But the purpose of the segregated account is that from experience past and depending on legal opinions, the opinions from all major jurisdictions is that a segregated account specified to contain funds for a specific entity and a specific purpose will not usually fall into the insolvency. Now, to make absolutely sure on every specific syndicated loan, what are you going to do? You're going to get another legal opinion. If it's Deutsche Bank, it'll be a German legal opinion. If it's Nomura, it'll be a Japanese legal opinion, and so on and so forth. So that's the way to handle the problem of the extremely unlikely case of the collapse of the agent bank. Oops, hang on. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. So that's the role of the agent bank as transferor of funds. Okay? Paying agent for funds transfers. Next, we need to look at something else. The question I raised. Is there an obligation on the part of the agent bank during the life of the loan, during the period of the loan, to monitor compliance by the borrower of all of the obligations and covenants in the syndicated loan agreement? And the answer is, as I said earlier, a clean, clear-cut no. An express clause in the SLA provides that the agent bank shall have no duty to monitor compliance by the borrower of its obligations under the SLA, including all of the covenants in the SLA. No obligation. What the agent bank is required to do is that if there is a default, and we'll talk about how do we know there's a default in a minute. If there is a default, an event of default occurring, then the agent bank must notify the default to the other syndicate banks, and secondly, require a majority decision by the syndicate banks whether to call default or no. That's the obligation of the agent bank. That's it. Now, the question that arises in this context is, when must the agent bank notify a default which is alleged to have occurred? When must it inform the other syndicate banks a default has occurred? Well, the answer is given once again by specific clauses in the syndicated loan agreement. Agent bank is required to notify the other syndicate banks of the occurrence of an event of default if an event of default and the occurrence of it has been notified to the agent bank by one of the other syndicate banks. And there's an obligation on the agent bank to notify everybody else. Secondly, there is an obligation to notify syndicate banks if, after a request by the agent bank from the borrower of a no default certificate, and the borrower has either A, failed to comply with a no default certificate, or B, it has notified the syndicate that yes, it is in default, then there's an obligation to notify the other syndicate members. Now remember that there is a power in the agent bank to ask for a no default certificate. And if you remember, the no default certificate has to be signed by 2 directors of the corporate entity, which is the borrower, or the central bank if it's a sovereign state. And it's on the basis of that that the agent bank which says, yes, there's an event of default. Now, if you think about the process, how should an agent bank operate? It gets a notification from a syndicate bank saying a default has occurred in Argentina by the borrower's operations out there. What do you do now? Do you immediately notify everybody? Well, you could if you're absolutely 100% sure, but you wouldn't if you're a prudent agent bank. You will immediately ask for a no default certificate from the borrower saying, it has been brought to my notice that there has been a default because your subsidiary in Argentina has given security over assets in breach of the SLA. Please confirm no default or confirm default. Based upon the response or the failure to respond during a specified period of time specified in the no default request, the syndicate will then proceed to inform the other members of the syndicate. The danger of actually simply notifying the entire syndicate when somebody says, by the way, there's a default in Argentina by the borrower, is that that may prove to be completely wrong. And therefore, you need to be sure of your ground before you make that allegation and call for a majority vote to call a default. Okay? Good. The next situation in which the agent bank is required to give a notice of default is when it has got actual knowledge of an event of default. Actual knowledge of an event of default on the part of the borrower. That's not easy because this is a global corporation with subsidiaries all over the place. If one of them, for example, has breached the asset disposal covenant of the borrower by disposing of assets above the cap amount permitted in the anti-disposal covenant, how do you know about it? How can you, the agent bank sitting in Frankfurt, Germany, if you're Deutsche Bank, or sitting in Tokyo, if you're Nomura, how on earth would you know? Well, this problem of knowledge is compounded by one more problem, and that is the practice. I hate this word because it means nothing, but that's what regulators call it. I'm sorry. They call it Chinese walls. Why are they Chinese? I have no idea. US banks, fortunately, have now started using a different phrase. They're called ethical walls. Well, okay, that's a bit much better than this one. But if you hear this phrase, you'll know what it means. It doesn't mean the Great Wall of China. It means an information barrier. This is what it refers to. An information barrier which prevents one part of a global bank from transferring information that it has in that division to another division. You get it? Say, let's take an example. The derivatives business in Tokyo of a major global bank becomes aware that a borrower in a syndicated loan agreement in which that bank is the agent bank is in breach of its derivatives transactions in Japan. Why is that relevant? Because if that's true, it could constitute a cross default under the SLA. Now, what is the position of that quote-unquote knowledge of the agent bank's office in Tokyo, which becomes aware that the borrower is in breach of not your loan, but a derivatives transaction with some third party in Tokyo? If you got that knowledge in your Tokyo office, are you, the agent bank, regarded as having actual knowledge of a breach of the SLA by the borrower because of a cross default? Well, let's not go into jurisprudence. Why? Because we have in all SLAs a market standard clause which deals with this problem. Namely, a provision which says that the agent bank shall not be deemed, shall not be regarded as having actual knowledge of the occurrence of an event of default unless the syndicate desk, i.e. the division which is handling syndicated loans, at its head office becomes aware of the default. So the knowledge of the Tokyo office in my example is irrelevant because of this clause. Without this clause, you get into all sorts of horribly complicated questions about what you mean by corporate knowledge. And I'm sure many of you have spent a lot of time in your undergraduate degree trying to work out what the hell do you mean by corporate knowledge. Usually in the context of corporate crime, corporate negligence in spilling poison into rivers and the like. All of that is utterly irrelevant in real life in the markets because you've got a specific clause which says, agent bank, you are deemed not to have any actual knowledge of any default unless the syndicate desk at head office becomes aware of that default. That neatly gets over the problem. And like I said, this is the reason why syndicated loan agreements are very long, because lawyers have spent a lot of time thinking about every possible problem and come up with an answer included in a specific clause. Yeah?
So syndicate desk is aware of default. What does it mean? Kind of written something?
Okay, you're asking whether the syndicate desk must be given written notification of the occurrence. The best answer to that question, your very good question, is that if you receive information at the desk, for example, because someone says it's on the Reuters screens up in Tokyo, you would require actual written notification of it. And then the next obvious thing you do is to ask for a no default certificate. It's the process that is used in practice because these clauses are there for a purpose. That no default certificate power is extremely important because at the first sign of the possibility of a default, it's usually something to do with cross default. Because if it's a syndicated loan agreement default, you'd know. The problem is the cross defaults, which are occurring in subsidiaries across the globe. The only way forward on that is that if you become aware of it at head office because someone has informed you, you will get a written statement, as you quite rightly say, and then ask for a no default certificate from the borrower's board of directors. Exactly. So that's how one would deal with this issue of knowledge on the part of the lead manager. So all those endless journal articles that people have written about what constitutes actual knowledge, the provisions in codes, the provision in Tesco Limited and Natras and all those cases, bin. Not relevant. Right, moving on. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Good. I'm glad you asked that. What the heck is a syndicate desk? Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm using language which the markets use. That's probably why you thought, what is a syndicate desk? It's not a desk, for a start. It is a division in the bank. For example, there's a derivatives desk which deals with derivatives. There's a bond desk, a division which deals with bonds. There's a syndicate desk which deals with syndicated loans. So it's that division at head office. Okay? Right, good. Oh, hang on, what was that again? Yeah. I think I mentioned this earlier, but let's just nail it down. The agent bank is sometimes, very infrequently, given a power to call a default of its own accord without actually resorting to a majority decision. If you're advising an agent bank with that power to call a default without getting majority decision from the syndicate banks, the advice that we've always given is straightforward. Don't do it. It's a power. You can exercise it or you can decide not to exercise it. Advice, don't exercise it. Tell the syndicate and get a majority decision. Why? Because you get it wrong as agent bank and call a default, everybody's going to sue you. End of story. So while this power is included sometimes because borrowers request it, it's not something that law firms will advise agent banks to use. Okay, so those are the main functions and obligations that the agent bank has. Let me give you a bottom line on this. If you noticed, the agent bank has few duties. What it does have, however, is a range of powers. If you go back to information covenants, the power to ask for information. If you go to the no default, the power to ask for a no default certificate. No duties. And that's important from a legal perspective. The duties are minimal. Powers are extensive. And that's deliberate in order to reduce the range of liability, legal liability, that an agent bank can be subject to. It is important. Having said all this, that's what's in the SLA. Next comes this eternal problem of fiduciary duties, about which there are books upon articles and journal articles, and even I was forced to write about it in my book. Can't help it. Everybody talks about it, so you've got to say something about it. Total waste of time, but let's just understand what it is. It starts with the proposition that the agent bank is an agent in law. An agent in law, under most law systems, is subject to fiduciary duties. Under most law systems, and certainly under English and New York law, an agent is subject to fiduciary duties. And these duties are owed to the syndicate banks, if they exist. Question, what are they, at least in theory? In theory, fiduciary duties of an agent are as follows. First of all, the agent bank must act with due care, skill, and diligence. For example, when it certifies satisfaction of conditions precedent. For example, in exercising functions with regard to compliance by the borrower of obligations. Okay? So that's the first one that the law seeks to impose. The second duty which the law will seek to impose is that the agent bank must not allow its interests, in particular its financial and business interests, to conflict with its duties under the syndicated loan agreement. In particular, it is prohibited under fiduciary law from engaging in any business with the borrower to the detriment of the other syndicate banks. The moment I say all this, it becomes reasonably obvious to anybody familiar with what a global bank happens to be that it is unworkable, these rules, in the context of the global markets and the way finance works. So what you've got in real life, in practice, in every SLA, is a whole range, a whole battery of clauses which seek to negate, extinguish each and every one of those fiduciary duties which the law seeks to impose on agents as fiduciaries. So you've got specific clauses which say you're not under any obligation to do any of the following. For example, to check the accuracy or genuineness of documents which have been received, constitutional documents, exchange control permissions from the central bank. You don't need to check whether they're genuine or whether they've been forged down back in back streets or somewhere. Not your job. You simply are allowed to rely on opinions of lawyers and other experts. After that, you have no further obligations. Secondly, the clean, clear-cut rule in the SLA contained in a clause which says agent bank has absolutely no obligation to monitor compliance with any of the covenants in the SLA by the borrower. And then there is another very specific clause which says that the agent bank shall owe no fiduciary duties other than those expressed in this syndicated loan agreement. That's a very important clause. The clause which says the agent bank shall have no duties other than those expressly set out in the syndicated loan agreement, SLA. This clause has been contested in court, saying, well, you can't do this. You're eroding hundreds of years of judicial intervention and judicial wisdom by a clause which says no duties except for those set out expressly in the syndicated loan agreement. But the Court of Appeal, at least under English law, held no, the court will not imply fiduciary duties if the SLA actually says no duties other than those expressly provided for in the SLA. So in this case, the clause actually said there's only liability for willful misconduct or gross negligence on the part of the agent bank. No liability for ordinary negligence, no liability for ordinary misconduct. Held, that's perfectly okay. Finally, there's a specific clause which authorizes and empowers the agent bank to carry on any business with the borrower or its subsidiaries or affiliates, either by the agent bank itself or by its subsidiaries and or affiliates. Perfectly normal clause. Why? Because the agent bank subsidiary in Japan could be doing business with the borrower's office in Australia. If you apply the old fiduciary rules, that's a breach. Can't do it. Thus, you have a specific clause saying you, the agent bank, the syndicate banks consent that the agent bank may carry on any business and make any profits from any transactions with the borrower or its subsidiaries and affiliates, anywhere. It's a wide-ranging authorization that's given to the agent bank in that specific clause, authorizing any kind of financial or business activity and to make profits. And importantly, there's a little addition at the end of it saying the syndicate banks empower and authorize the agent bank to carry on any financial or any other business with the borrower, its affiliates, or subsidiaries anywhere. Doesn't end there. Without any duty to account to syndicate banks for any profits made. You haven't got anything to account for.
My first question is it about the lead manager as well? Because this one, willful misconduct, if I know that I'm doing something not right, but I'm still doing it, do I have this liability when I cross negligence or willful misconduct? And the other thing is also about
And
this one.
okay, so you're asking the question, if the agent bank engages in conduct which it knows is wrongful, is there liability? Well, answer, yes, if you got the LMA clause.
Yes.
Because the LMA clause actually says not liable for anything other than willful misconduct or gross negligence.
No, I'm asking about lead man. I'm going back again with the lead manager. Before it comes up.
Oh, right. So what is the willful misconduct that you're talking about? Let's try and be specific. What kind of thing do you have in mind? So we're not talking of the agent bank, right?
No,
Okay.
we are talking about lead manager. I'm a bank of borrower, future borrower. So maybe I know there is something going not that right, and I don't say.
Okay. Before the syndicated loan agreement is signed, the lead manager is not the agent bank. It is a lead manager. Point one. It is acting, therefore, as principal to principal with other parties. Because it's not acting as agent bank, no fiduciary duties are owed.
So he is not obliged to say anything about the.
Not at all, because at that time, until the syndicated loan agreement is signed, it's not an agent bank. Therefore, not a fiduciary. Therefore, not any of those rules in the common law or any other fiduciary law become applicable. It's only when it becomes the agent bank, agrees to act on behalf of the other members of the syndicate, that the obligation arises. Yeah.
And the other question is about this, as I understand it, is under English law, this decision for.
Yes, of course.
Yes. But if it were with SLA was governed under like German law
Or Japanese law,
so where should we look then?
God only knows. That's why we don't use it. Well, the straight answer is you need Japanese legal opinion as to what is the position with a clause like this under Japanese law. I don't know the answer to that without Japanese legal opinion. But I think the key point is this. If you're dealing with a law system which is capable of interfering with written clauses in a written agreement on the basis of judicial power, which enables clauses to be inserted, which enables clauses to be restricted, then there's no point in an SLA like this. The reason why these SLAs are long, there are express clauses dealing with it because they will be usually under one or two law systems, English law, New York law, where these clauses will not be allowed to be interfered with by judges. They are given effect to as written, without the analysis of purpose, reasonableness, blah, blah, blah. And that's important to the markets because, and here's the reason, here's the commercial reason. If I'm the agent bank, and if I'm 100% sure, based on legal opinions, that I have no liability for carelessness, no liability for acting unreasonably, no liability when I do business with my borrowers, subsidiaries, and affiliates, it means one more thing. I don't need to get insurance for it. Because if I've got liability, potential liability, I get insurance. In the markets, that's what you do. You don't just sit at home and pray. You get insurance. The moment you get insurance, that insurance cost is built into the costs to the borrower. Very simple. Thus, using a law system like this one, you reduce the cost because the insurance costs aren't there. I mean, this is commercial, it's not legal stuff, but it's just background. And it's a very important aspect. I mean, you'll see this when we go into bonds as well, because the built-in cost includes insurance costs based on projected liability of the lead manager, agent bank, and the like. The more you can reduce the liability in law of a lead manager or agent bank, the lower the insurance costs. Lower the insurance costs, the lower the cost to a potential borrower or issue of bonds. So if I can say, under the law systems that I'm going to choose, whether I'm a Japanese bank or a German bank, because of this, I have no liability, therefore I don't need to get insurance, I say to my client, your costs are a lot lower if we go down this route. Those are things that you will hear when you sit down and draft these agreements one day, soon, I suspect, because those are factors which go into this choice of law process as well. I didn't talk about it because they're not really legal issues, but they are relevant. Cost of insurance in the face of potential liability. Any other thoughts or comments? Yeah, please do. Sorry. Yep. There is usually an indemnity clause if the lead manager as agent bank is required to perform certain functions. That's all. Because of the fact that the agent bank has got literally no liabilities. There's no need for an indemnity. But if there is a requirement of indemnity, it is because the lead manager thinks, or the agent bank thinks, there could be potential liability. I will get an indemnity from my syndicate banks if I proceed down this route, but not otherwise. Right, I think I'm just going to summarize what the bottom line stuff. There are, as I explained earlier, very few duties on the agent bank. Things like notifying default if it becomes aware of it. Most of the agent bank's functions are discharged, its responsibilities are discharged, not under legal duties, but legal powers. It's a very important distinction, because power means the agent bank has a right either to do something or not to do something. That's the essence of a power. It's a discretion. And consequently, because it is not a duty to act, the potential liability is a lot less. Because if you ask the question, in what circumstances is there a liability in relation to a power. Now I'm going into general law. If you ask that question, there is no duty under the common law, at least English or New York law, for the failure to exercise a power. The agent bank says, no, I'm not exercising it. The only requirement is that the agent bank must consider whether to exercise it or not. That's all. If it does that and says, well, I'm not going to exercise it, and that decision was completely wrong, careless, no liability because of those clauses. If, on the other hand, it fails to exercise a power without even considering whether it should or shouldn't, that could be liability, is the answer to the general law question. Failure to exercise powers, because it is an important aspect of the SLA, because most of the syndicate lead managers and agent banks' functions and responsibilities are carried out under powers, not under legal duties. So if there's a total failure to exercise a power, there could be liability. And that's about all I was going to say on syndicated loans. What do you want to do for the next hour? What would you like to talk about? Donald Trump's ties, length of, whether Mrs. Merkel is going to survive a German vote, anything. No, nothing? Or do you want me to carry on to the next topic, which is international bonds? Well, you can tell me. Just move on to the next topic. Okay, I'm happy to do it. No. You've got two options. Either we finish now, go have a cup of coffee and go and do the next seminar, or we get on to international bonds, which I'm very happy to do. What would you like to do? Sorry, what? Continue. Wow, okay. How many of you don't want to continue and want to go to the nearest wine bar? Nobody. My God, you guys are dedicated. If that question was asked when I was a student, the entire class would have gone like that. Okay. In which case, I will move on to... what I was going to do was to actually walk you through the LMA Master Agreement. But I don't think that's really necessary because you've done it, I guess, because I told you keep following the LMA Master and what it says when I talk about negative pledge or covenants or representation. So I assume you've been doing that. And there's no need for me to run through this. The only thing I just wanted to say about this, I think I've said this and I just wanted to emphasize it. It's put together by a group of banks and law firms simply to provide corporations and banks which do not have access to a finely crafted SLA, their own SLA, crafted by a Sullivan and Cromwell in New York or a Linklaters in London or a Clifford Chance in London or whoever. Everybody's got these things crafted. I mean, if you're JP Morgan, of course you have an SLA crafted. If you're ExxonMobil or Hyundai, of course you've got an SLA drafted. The only question is, if you're dealing with JP Morgan and JP Morgan is dealing with Hyundai, they'll have two SLAs and they say mine's better than yours. So you'll spend the next 3 days arguing about each clause. Good for us, lawyers, but you don't really need to draft it from scratch, from the beginning. But of course there are corporate entities which do not have these crafted SLAs, and this LMA Master is a fallback. That's essentially what it is. It's a fallback if you don't have it, cut costs, and you can use this LMA Master. But that's about all that it says. They are very similar because they are drawing on the commonality of the master SLAs that most law firms or most major banks and corporations use in the marketplace. It's a good indicator of market practice, what people are doing. Beyond that, I wouldn't go. So I'll leave you with it to walk through the LMA Master yourself. So you're doing a master's degree, right? So. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. What does the miscellaneous clause in your mind do? You can put anything you want. As you wish, miscellaneous, exactly as the name implies. Including signature shall be in blue. Whatever you like. It doesn't matter. but the guts of an agreement, I've only taken you through the main specific clauses, the main structures. I mean, the clauses are a lot more detailed than that because I haven't taken you to 250 pages of typing at all. But this is sufficient for you to understand the guts of it. You can expand it as much as you want in detail, but this is the guts of an SLA. Right, so you guys all want to get onto bonds next. I hear sort of faint murmurings of no, no, no. You want to say no, 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 for God's sake, raise your hand and say no. Yeah, sorry. Please do. I mean, here's another thing I was going to ask you. I know you guys are asked every week. Do you have questions day one at every seminar? And I get silence. By the way, that's not a good sign because when we started the module about, 2 months ago, the questions came thick and fast. Now the questions started trickling down, and yesterday it came to silence. That was not good because it's a sure sign that you're not actually on top of things and you're kind of heavily into clubbing or whatever it is you do in your part-time. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, I know. Okay. The LMA Master is available in the library. All you got to do is go to the MOM library, ask the librarian for, I think you need a kind of access code, access password, and you access the LMA Master, and you can have the latest version. It is updated quite regularly, yes. All right, so how many of you don't want to go into bonds today? I think you guys are in a major league minority. You're surrounded by very keen people. Before I go on to bonds, there are two things I need you to look at, okay? There's a reading list which will tell you what you need to be looking at. Secondly, there's a diagram, a nice colored diagram, which I would like you to print up, or you guys don't print anything. Get it onto your mobile, Samsung, and bring it into class, okay? Because that's what I'm going to work with in relation to bonds, okay? It's there on Keats, so all you got to do is download it and bring it in, because a lot of the discussion, a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about will assume that that's what we're looking at, okay? All right, so can we do some basics? Let's not get into the thick of it on bonds, yeah? Okay? No, you don't want to do it? Sorry, I want to hear this one. You what?
It will be a mix of two different stuff.
You don't want to mix the two?
No.
Today?
No, I don't.
Only, all right, here's the deal. If you promise Scout's honor, I wouldn't say lawyer's honor, because that kind of is a contradiction. But Scout's honor, that you will concentrate on pulling together your understanding of syndicated loans and come into class next week to start bonds. Everybody. Because that's the purpose of, if you want to break between bonds and loans, I'm happy to do it. But I need you to say you're going to use that time effectively and usefully. So that, for example, starting next week, when I say any questions on syndicated loans, I expect your hand to go up with a number of questions. I mean, I'm being honest, okay? I think what you need to do is to go through your syndicated loan stuff, look at the fact pattern analyses that you should have done, and may not have done, and write down, okay? Don't say I'll think about it. Write down all the questions you need to talk through. Come into your next seminar and ask. Whatever it is that you want to know more about, explore, find difficult. Scout's honor. Yes? Okay, most of you guys don't know what the hell a Scout's honor is, but okay. Whatever honor you rely on. Lawyer's honor, if you actually subscribe to that. Will you do that? And I'm happy to stop now because 1 hour, I'd love to go get a cup of coffee and then do my next seminar. So if you like, we'll leave it at this and I'll pick up international bonds next week. Yes? Okay, done. You're so happy. Yeah. No, it's all right.
A few seconds.
Yeah, sure.
You say download something.
Oh, it's on Keats. It's a diagram on bonds. It's there. Yeah.
I still have
Okay.
because I'm not sure that I will be chosen to practice.
Wait, the list is already there.
I mean, in the beginning of the semester, so I chose the invitation.
Okay.
And now I talked to my Dickinson school department, but they haven't replied my email. So I wonder if I can ask you to change this.
Let me just see if your name is there. Hang on. I've got the list here, so why don't we check it while we are talking? Let me just. Right. List of people on the project. Actually, the pathway secretary should have a list. You know that I've got it here. Seminar list. You're on the list. Okay, well, you're on the list. Yeah. I mean, you can actually access the list on Keats under practice project. Why not? Oh, I see. Well, then disenroll from the dissertation and ask. Hang on, let me see whether I've got a list. It's the easiest way of doing it. I should have a list, but. Okay, what's your name?
Start with D, Debbie.
Sorry, say that again. D for.
D for Debbie. This one.
Here you go. You're there.
So I can.
You can ask them to take your name off dissertation because you're doing it. Okay. Hi. Yeah. No, we can talk now. For once, you actually got time to talk. So, I'm going to sit down, and you can do the talking. You guys want to talk?
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question.
Well, if you look at it, VP is going to receive the fund at a specified location. Correct? No. All payments are to be made at certain locations. Many $30 amount euros in fact. All payments, which means the loan payment plus interest and principal repayments by the borrower. All on these three locations. As well as the lending. All payments. Loan payments, interest repayments, interest payments, principal repayments, and three locations. Yep. 9. It's not Article 9, you guys keep on jumping on Article 3, Article 9, 3, and 6. It's exactly the same. The amount of receiving fluid you've got to need to lend without the say that I thank you school. Sure. You're applying to level 10. Good. There's 3,200 applicants for, I looked at it, and I looked at it, for about 200 places. Much more places now, but equally, another application. It's very tough, but hey, what's your background? You don't have to pay. Where do you do your degree? All right, okay, good luck.
Thank you.
Okay? End of semester is 50 minutes.
Yeah, online they've got a weird stuff. They said that technical portion is like a revision. But I agree with you.
Okay, you do it if you want, that's fine, whatever you like. Yeah. I know, but I don't think you're the dissertation. wood
What's the name of it?
as distinct from brick, which is more likely to catch fire. Yeah, right. Insurance for wooden houses is a lot more than brick.
I will ask next. So,
So reduce liabilities.
To reduce.
Reduce.
If you build a house in brick, you are low insurance. And if you build a house in wood,
So the insurance is for building.
lead management liability.
Not that.
Okay. So have you finished or you got another question?
so you're let's do the thing. Or next time reply.
What's the question? Strong supervisory authority. Okay. What do they supervise? Do they supervise them? Where do they supervise them? They don't supervise them in this country or in the US. Strong regulation exists in relation to capital market derivatives, especially those which are aimed at small companies, individuals, and the like. But in syndicated loans, there is no regulation. So what's the question? I'm completely lost with the question. Can you try and tell me exactly what you're trying to find out? If you have a fact situation in which this problem arises, it's the easiest way of doing it at a theoretical level. Okay, that's it. Fine. Think about it and come back for the next seminar. When is your next seminar? Good. You've got 1 hour to think about it. Oh, back again. Well, first of all, which seminar?
Next Tuesday, Group A.
Group A, Tuesday, at what time?
4 to 6.
4 to 6. Easy. Tuesday,
Next week.
the week after at 4 to 6.
Great.
Yeah?
Thanks very much. Send your mail to
Sure, please send them. More question? I got to sit down with her and go through a list. I would. What is it you're drinking? Coffee. I'm going to get a cup of coffee. Would you like it to be fine?
I'll bring you.
Okay, good. Ugh, it's just nice to have a break.
Yeah.
Thank you for suggesting.
Because I think that it's really.
No, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I've happily gone on, but I think you need to let this settle before you start looking at something utterly different.
Yeah, because 5 minutes to change the topic
It's
like
not.
probably or
It's not. That's why I asked that question. I didn't want to kind of waste an hour. If people said, "Can we please go?" A couple of guys were very. And I think if you really want to go on, are you really concentrating on what the hell you're doing? So I don't know. Anyway, maybe they weren't concentrating. Yeah, well, okay, we're done. Okay.
it's really because I found I was
20 years, they will make their documentary. I was sitting exactly here with Antifa.
Quiet! Quiet!
Where's that your voice, bro? I thought it was someone else.
Thomas Radzik, bro.
So, bro, do you want to take the picture or not?
Yeah, bro, help me first.
Help me first, I'm here already. But where is the microphone?
Imagine, we go to jail for coming here, but Antifa doesn't for breaking this.
Bro, give me your phone.
Should I show you the button?
Bro, it's fine.
So it wasn't a joke. Everyone will take the same picture.
I should pretend as if I'm talking something, as if I'm explaining to you stupid Mongol.
Tell me about
To you stupid Mongol, I need to explain.
Explain what? What's a tree in data structure? Tell me.
A tree in data structures is a structure.
But
Is a
bro,
tree.
once again, bro, I'm sure in the pictures you will tell that you're ironic. You have to explain to me sincerely.
Look.
Is any of them serious?
I'm just taking.
This one I'm arguing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one.
Help me.
Wait, let me see.
Yeah, Benny, better.
I suggest you guys put it on LinkedIn in the same time.
Look. Bro, I'm like a member of Ukrainian parliament. Okay, maybe take one more. I'll be more serious.
Bro, you have to tell me seriously. Bro, seriously, don't laugh.
Let me
What's
tell you
a
about
tree? Seriously,
artificial intelligence, machine learning. Bro, I forgot everything.
What methods can you
Tree has nodes, and from nodes you have connections to other nodes, and there can be different kinds of trees. Some trees can be connected, some trees cannot be connected.
What's the difference? Imagine we do a real. Yeah, now that he's laughing, take a good picture of him.
And now let me just serious.
I think while moving it was good.
Okay, Pablo.
Okay, bro. Explain to me. Help me. Bro, do you know a poem?
Quiet, huh?
Do you know a poem?
I know.
Repeat. Say the poem. What poem do you know?
Let me remember it. Хуй пизда. Хуй пизда, залупа материца глупа.
That's very good, bro.
You ready?
That's what-
You
what's
ready?
that? Bro, look at the board. What's that, bro? The board. What does it
Science. What is it all about? Technology.
say? And
What's it all about?
mean?
And today I is here with my main man, none other than Professor Pavlos Moros. Now, Professor Pavlos Moros. Bro, stand here. Хуй пизда, залупа, материца, глупа. What is it all about? Ach ja. Nicht, oh, ach ja. Pavlo, so my fellow student, if
By the way, all of this is recorded. And I'm
no,
sure we'll
nicht,
go
nicht.
somewhere.
Q&A.
No, bro. Nicht.
Bro.
Bro, obviously. Bro, did you guys just realize, bro? Are you retarded? Everything we say is being heard and recorded.
In someone's lecture capture with CS.
Hello. Right? Bro, imagine how big it was supposed to be class, and someone just before exam binge watches everything and sees week 11. Ooh, it's the book. This is, no, it's kidding. I would say. We worked on it. Okay, guys, can we go? Because we're gonna get arrested if we get.
Given that it's
Bro, what's chance?
Last chance or here? Here. There.
Bro, but we're students, bro.
Okay.
I'm a work week.
When the light is recording, when the light is indicating red, it means that lecture captures is recording. I hope Antifa doesn't evade my event. Fuck mothers. Did they go well?
oh guys, bro.
Actually, that's way cooler, bro.
Bro, fuck it, bro. Let's go smoke. Nah.
No exit, bro. Please use the exit from that door. It says no.
Bro, what do you mean, bro?
Yes, you're James.
No, Eduardo.
Eduardo. Okay, sorry. I thought that you were somebody else. Another student who emailed me.
I suppose that you are Machu.
I am indeed, yes. Nice to meet you too.